Fearful avoidants have one of the hardest paths ahead of them when it comes to love and intimacy, really second only to the people who choose to date them. Now, if you're dating a fearful avoidant, you can expect a lot of confusion, mixed signals, and complex dynamics that can cause problems in your relationship and really make it difficult to connect. But there is hope. If you're able to understand how fearful avoidants work and lead with compassion for your partner and for yourself, you will often be able to make it work. And it starts with understanding what fearful avoidants are truly afraid of. I'm Brad Browning, author of the X Factor 2.0, and I've been a breakup and relationship coach for almost 15 years now. And in that time, I've seen people with different attachment styles break up, but I've also seen them come together. And I've learned that it's not so much what your attachment style is, as much as how much you're willing to actually take accountability and do the work to build a relationship. So let's talk a bit about fearful avoidance. Basically, fearful avoidance is the combination of two different attachment styles, anxious and avoidant. And this is why you may sometimes see it called the anxious avoidant attachment style. Now, anxious attachment is characterized by a sense of preoccupation around the relationship and romantic partners. So someone with anxious attachment is overly sensitive to their partner's behavior and mood. They take a missed text or a slight frown as a threat to the relationship. They struggle to regulate their emotions or just to be alone. They're preoccupied with how others think and feel, so they adopt people-pleasing behavior to mitigate these feelings because they often struggle with their sense of self. They're distressed by distance, and so they adopt clingy and desperate behavior that can be off-putting to their partners. These are the people who ask, do you really love me? Do you care about me? Is everything okay? Because they're constantly worried about the relationship and about not being enough for their partner, and they let these anxieties guide their actions. But that is just half of the equation. The other half is avoidance. Now, the avoidant attachment style is characterized by extreme independence, by fear of intimacy, and by a tendency to separate from others. So avoidants struggle to form romantic connections because they're afraid to get close to other people. They often lack the emotional skills that others take for granted. They have a strong tendency to self-isolate and to keep their feelings bottled up. So their response to stress or issues in the relationship is to take space from their partner and work it out on their own. So they can be seen as cold, flaky, and unfeeling by those close to them. They can fail to fulfill the needs of their partner due to their tendency to run away from both conflict and connection, leaving their partner holding the bag emotionally. So how can a person be both anxious and avoidant? Well, that's really where things get interesting, because fearful avoidants have features of both of these attachment styles, and they tend to swing from one extreme to the other with no warning. So to understand this, let's talk about what they're actually afraid of. So number one is they fear intimacy and they fear being alone. So the fearful avoidant struggles to get close to other people without feeling smothered. They find romantic relationships stifling because they restrict their freedom and represent a threat to their sense of self. Now, in my dealings with fearful avoidant clients, they describe it almost as a sense of claustrophobia, an intense feeling of being trapped and a powerful desire to break free of those constraints. And this fear makes them act irrationally because it overwhelms their logical brain. They know that their actions hurt their partner, hurt their relationship, and ultimately hurt themselves, but they're unable to stop their behavior. And at the same time, unlike the typical avoidant, they're also driven by an equally powerful fear of being alone. And that's why there's times where they'll act clingy and desperate. They might ask you for a lot of validation and compliments. They may be upset if you can't spend all your time with them. They'll keep telling you how much they miss you and insist that you communicate with them constantly. Now, of course, they do love you and care about you, but they're also very afraid of being left alone without you. It's a powerful loneliness and an equally powerful fear of connection. And this is what makes fearful avoidance so destructive to both the avoidant and to those who love them. And number two, they also fear you relying on them emotionally. Now, emotions can be a great source of pain for a fearful avoidant, partly because they lack the emotional regulation skills that many of us just take for granted. So while most of us feel some fear when they think about committing to one person for the rest of our lives, or we get bummed at the prospect of showing up to another family gathering without a partner, for the fearful avoidant, these feelings can be truly debilitating. And this is why they may associate emotions with a negative spiral of fear and shame. So it shouldn't be surprising that the idea of taking on your emotions on top of all that is, of course, troubling for them. Now, your partner shouldn't be your one and only source of emotional support, but it's perfectly normal and healthy to rely on your partner emotionally. You're essentially trusting them to be there, to be your sounding board and your shoulder to cry on. You want somebody who can lift you up or to talk you down when things get bad. A fearful avoidant may see this as something that they're simply not capable of. I mean, they can't even manage their own emotions, and now they're expected to help you deal with yours. It can feel like too much. And on top of that, one of the things they're most scared of is the idea that this is forever. You see, the more that you rely on them emotionally, the more you have invested in them. And since they know that they've been unreliable in the past, this scares them. What if they simply run out of emotional bandwidth when you need them the most? What if you ask them questions that they don't have the answer to? What if they feel crushed under the weight of your emotional demands? These are really the questions that go through their head whenever they start to feel anxious about the relationship. And number 3, they also fear being rejected and replaced. Now, fearful avoidants are afraid of being alone, but they're even more afraid of being abandoned. Because even though a fearful avoidant may not know anything about attachment theory, they know that they struggle in relationships, and most of them know that they are the main driver of these struggles. They've seen relationships fall apart again and again due to their own emotional issues. They've felt powerful negative emotions and acted irrationally, and then they've suffered the consequences. So now every time things fall apart, they blame themselves. They feel unlikable, unlovable, and really impossible to be with. And this creates a vicious cycle for fearful avoidance. They fear rejection, so they cling on tighter. They feel slighted, so they pull away to protect themselves. And every time they're rejected, whether this is as big as a divorce or a breakup, or as small as being denied a kiss because they have morning breath, it feeds into their negative behavior because in their mind, it proves them right, that they're difficult to love. Now, of course, this goes hand in hand with jealousy, which, for the fearful avoidant, is the fear of being replaced. Since they don't put much stock in themselves as a romantic partner, they imagine that you could easily replace them and have a happier life with just about anyone. They fear their issues will cause the end of the relationship, and this is a valid fear because it really does happen all the time. And number 4, they fear being overmatched in emotional conflicts. So as we've said, fearful avoidants fail to develop some key emotional skills in childhood, at least as far as relationships are concerned. So as adults, they struggle with emotional regulation and with communicating their feelings. And this is one of the biggest reasons why they avoid conflict and intimacy, because they lead to conversations that they can't handle. So I think of it like this. Maybe you've ever been to a foreign country where you can barely speak the language. Someone asks you something on the street and you say the 2 or 3 words that you know in the language, and then they assume you're fluent and they launch into a long diatribe and you're just standing there scratching your head. And this is how a fearful avoidant feels when it comes to certain more complex emotional conversations. They can fake it for a while, but pretty soon they're going to be lost and it's going to be painfully obvious and embarrassing. So they'll rarely come out and admit this because they feel shame at not understanding this stuff. They fear their ignorance is going to push you away. So they'll typically fall back on their 2 go-to tactics. They'll either smother you with love and attention, love bomb you essentially, or they'll pull away, they'll dismiss your concerns, and they'll just change the subject. Now these tactics can be like putting up a wall between the fearful avoidant and their romantic partner. And on some level, this is exactly what they want. Because of number 5, they fear being known. Now I'm sure we all feel this way one way or another. You want closeness with another person, but you also fear opening up and letting them see your true self. Will they still care about you when they see what your family's like? Will they still respect you when they see that you still have that teddy bear on your bed? Are they going to still love you when they know that, the shameful secrets from your past? Now these are very normal feelings, but for fearful avoidants, they're often magnified. And this is not only because they're more prone to fear and struggle to handle it, but also because their attachment style has created some legitimate red flags in their behavior and their personalities. So maybe they ghosted a long-term relationship. Maybe they moved in with somebody after 2 dates. Maybe they're afraid to say, I love you. And these fears will further feed into their tendency to smother and to avoid. So with all these fears, you may wonder if it's even possible to get close to a fearful avoidant, much less make them feel better. And while you can't completely change their personalities or take away all their anxiety, there are things that you can do to help a fearful avoidant feel safe within the relationship. And number 1 is to be specific about your needs. So don't make them guess about how you feel. One of the biggest issues that a fearful avoidant has is that they live in their own head. They push and pull because they're feeling pushed and pulled by their own emotions. One second they think you're going to leave them, and the next they think that you're getting too close. And in large part, this is driven by the expectations that they believe you have. They may think that if they don't text you for 3 hours, you're going to be upset, so they force themselves to communicate more, and then they resent you for it. Or they may think that you expect them to take you on fancy dates every weekend, even though they can't afford it. They may think that you're mad at them because you don't use enough emojis in your messages. Now, unfortunately, you can't control their thoughts, but you can help prevent them from spinning out by being extremely clear about your intentions and your feelings. So, how often you want to be in contact, when you need time alone, what kind of relationship you want to have, how much time you want to spend together, your sexual needs. These are all things you can spell out overtly if they're causing problems for you or your partner. You don't have to, write them a manual for dating you, but err on the side of over-explaining things to help them understand and avoid assumptions. Then when your partner starts to spiral because, they haven't bought you an expensive gift in a while, they can say, "Oh, I remember they said they don't need anything fancy." Even a bouquet of flowers once in a while makes them feel special. Now, I know it can feel less romantic to spell things out for your partner, but too much mystery can really get you into trouble, especially if your partner is a fearful avoidant. Now, number 2 is don't expect to change them. Remember that attachment styles can change with time and circumstance, but they can't be manipulated to fit your needs. This person had this attachment style long before you came along, and chances are they'll have it for the rest of their life. So don't try to change them into a different person. No matter how gentle you think you're being, all you're doing is putting them under pressure and setting yourself up for disappointment. This doesn't mean that they're not responsible for their actions, but you need to figure out if you want them for who they actually are or just for the potential of who they could be. Now, firm boundaries are really your friend, so make it clear what you won't tolerate and then don't tolerate it. It's not about making them prove their love for you, but seeing if you're capable of creating the life that you both want together. And that brings us to number 3, don't walk on eggshells. So it's important to be aware of your partner's triggers and be willing to cut them slack, but don't ever let it get to the point of where you feel like you're walking on eggshells just to keep them happy. That's it's a recipe for resentment for both of you. So you need to be able to be honest with your fearful avoidant partner, and if they screw up, let them know, or don't be surprised when they do it all over again. It's true that honesty may cause problems at times, but then at least the problems will be out in the open where they can be dealt with rather than hidden. And by the same token, don't keep them at a distance out of fear of triggering their anxiety. If you can't hold them close and be intimate with them, then this relationship it's not going to work out long term. And that ties in nicely to number 4, be realistic about their capacity. Now, in my work, I've noticed a very common pattern. You meet someone, you're attracted to them, you embark on a relationship. And as you get to know them, you start to see their red flags. You see that they have a few traits that truly clash with your own and would make it essentially impossible for you to be happy together. But instead of ending things or even talking about it, you keep quiet and you hope that things will get better the longer the two of you are together. You just let that resentment build, waiting for that magical moment when they change and become the person who you want them to be. And this attitude is what kills relationships. Of course, the other person is accountable for their behavior, but if you don't like them at your best, you're never going to be happy together and you're both wasting your time. So try to understand them and be honest with yourself about whether the two of you are actually compatible. If you can do that, you'll have the best chance at happiness. And that just about does it for this video. Remember, fearful avoidance can present problems, but it's not necessarily a death sentence for your relationship. You can find happiness together, although it may take a little more work at times. Thanks for watching, thanks for your likes and subscribes, and see you in the next video.